Okay, this is a look at the Against the Odds annual from 2015, Four Roads to Paris. This is 4 games on the fall of France in 1940. I'm playing, the first game that I'm playing of the series here is Betrayal. This is Roger Nord, and the art, the map, Mark Mahaffey, which looks like a typical Mark Mahaffey map. The other maps in the series are all similar in terms of colors. Mark Mahaffey never met a desaturated color palette that he didn't like. All of his maps tend to have this sort of murky blue and murky green and like desaturated colors. Some of his maps are very good. I'm not universally trashing his maps, but he does have a distinct style, and it leads towards these sort of almost pastel-looking desaturated colors. He's not known for a lot of high contrast, except maybe on his map that he did originally for the Dark Valley. And I think they ended up replacing that with a Simonich map because people didn't like the sort of not overly desaturated there. It was more, I think, the terrain graphics and stuff people didn't care for as much. I thought it was a fine map, but it definitely had a style to it that I think your typical, only NATO symbols on the counters type of crowd, the rivet counters, didn't like. They want every map to look like it was from SPI in 1978, and I'm not one of those types. I do like those maps, but I don't believe that they are the apex and sum total of wargame graphical design. I believe there's room for innovation, and Mark Mahaffey has certainly been somebody that has innovated in that regard, sometimes just not always to great effect. But this particular game in the collection is fairly straightforward. It's all area control. The unique thing about it is that if 2 players are playing, and I played this solo, it's not a solo game, but if there are 2 players, they each control, one player plays the British and the other plays the French. The German side is controlled by an AI, or it's an automata, I think is the term used in the rules. But it's all run by dice rolls on these tables. The Germans will roll to see where they can operate, if they can only operate in one of the Low Countries, or if they can operate over the whole map. And then they'll have a number of tactics rolls, and their tactics rolls on this chart, trying to avoid the glare. The tactics rolls will determine what they can do, and they'll have a certain number of these. They may only have one, which limits what they can do, or they could have multiple rolls, which gives them more tactical flexibility. One of the big things for them is the refit tactic. If they get that on a 4 or 5, it allows them to flip their step loss units back to full strength on the whole map, and then bring in everybody that's in the regroup box back onto the map. Which is a huge deal because the Allies don't have any such, sweeping capability to replenish their step loss units or to bring units onto the map. And you can see they're heavily stacked here of eliminated units that you have to roll a die to see if they can get into the regroup box. And then you're rolling a die again on the next turn to see how many of the units in the regroup box you can bring back onto the map. And so it's a much... The Germans also have to do that, but they can sort of have this get-out-of-jail-free card. If they roll the refit, it allows them to just pull it all out quickly. That happened twice for me in the 8 turns that I played. I ended up calling it after 8 turns because the Germans had taken all of the port spaces, and that was a key element of their victory conditions. To get at least a minor victory. For the Germans, they had to control the French Republic marker, or the Netherlands and Belgium surrender all units eliminated or outside own borders. So that happened fairly early on. They took the Low Countries pretty quickly, eliminated the entire armies for the Low Countries there. And so they were already at a minor victory. And then to get a major victory, they had to control 3 of these 4 3-port areas, French Republic marker, Paris, and at least 2 named South Map edge areas. And they already had all that except the French Republic marker. The French Republic marker retreated out of Paris with these units when they were forced to withdraw. So the Germans, you can see, they do have Paris. They've got 3 South Map spaces. They've totally overrun the Maginot Line. Early on, the French had to start pulling units up here, which basically happened historically. I don't remember if the Germans ever swept across the Maginot Line at any point, or if everything just came in that way. But yeah, they ended up hitting here eventually as well once the French had to pull back far enough. The big problem for the Allies in this is they just don't have any offensive power at all. They're, I think the strongest unit they have is this French unit that's got a offensive strength of 5. Everything else is mostly 2s or 3s, which is not going to be enough, to take on a fully stacked hex of German armor, which, right here you've got 18 points of defense, and there's just nothing that the Allies can bring that can even get a 1-to-1 against that if they're bringing 3 guys in. So, and the stacking limit is 3, so that's the max you can bring into a space is going to be 3. You can temporarily overstack from moving, but not for entering and staying in a zone. So, with no offensive capability, the Allies are just immediately playing defense the whole time. They do have air units that can help them with column shifts or can intercept and attempt to stop German attacks, but their capabilities are so limited. It is just them trying to figure out how to not give up everything immediately. They can on defense. The Germans are hampered by their tactical die rolls. Essentially, it can be good for them, but it can also be bad if they're required to attack, for example, and you don't really have them positioned in the best way to attack the Allies. You can get some bad results for the Germans because they're attacking when they really shouldn't be. You haven't optimized your line, and you can't because you're forced to do whatever the tactics require you to do. So there were some instances where I did get exchanges. Exchanges are very bad for the Germans because inevitably, if Germans, like say I got an exchange with these 3 guys, the Germans are losing 3 8.62 armor units, potentially against, crappy or reduced strength French infantry units. It's not a good exchange. And yet in an exchange, everybody dies. So the hex, all the units in the hex go to their respective set aside. So exchanges are very bad for the Germans, are worse for the Germans than they are for the Allies, just because the Germans are going to be losing much higher strength and more valuable units in those exchanges. So that was one thing that the Allies did have, was that their capability to occasionally get exchanges and weaken the Germans' offensive thrust. But it doesn't happen enough. The Germans have too many high-strength units that keep pouring in, especially because the infantry is going to be coming in behind the armor. And so it can leave the Germans vulnerable to a counterattack, but I found that it didn't really stop the overall progression of German units. Again, because usually the exchanges are happening when the Allies are defending. The Allies are very rarely attacking. The only offensive maneuvers that I really did with the Allies were, again, if the Germans did get out of position in some way, sometimes I would try and hit back with the Allies, on a 1.5-to-1 or 1-to-1 attack. I don't think I ever got anything more than 1.5-to-1 against the Germans on an Allied attack. So, it's just what the Allies are stuck dealing with. A difficult proposition for them to get any offensive momentum against the Germans going. It is just defense the whole way. I don't know how they can win, really not being able to attack. It seems pretty inevitable to me, and I don't know if it's just trying to, last out the number of turns. to see what happens, for the victory conditions. I mean, the British have to control 4 ports, which, is nearly impossible for them to do. So, in fact, I'm not even sure where the 4th port is, because there's the 3, Boulogne, Calais, and Dunkirk. But there's not another port marker on the map, unless I'm missing it. So yeah, maybe that's... and so the British can evacuate units. So I did do that. Like, I got the 9 units away, but, lost control of all the ports in the process. So, it doesn't help the British. But yeah, and then the French, if you can hang on to the French Republic marker, Paris, and all the South map edge hexes, that's a big deal for the French. Doesn't seem to be possible. You can control the French Republic marker and Paris, or all named to get a minor victory, and that wasn't happening. It's the Germans are, there's no way, once the French lose Paris, again, because they can't attack, they can't muster any offensive capability, they can't retake this once they lose it. So, once Paris is done, it's done. So, difficult for the Allies to achieve a victory in this one, it seems to me. So, the other interesting element of the rules, the aside from the fact that the 2 players that would be playing this would be playing essentially on the same side, they are kind of playing against each other, because they'll roll to see who actually controls the Germans on each turn. So they're, pitting the Germans against each other. I mean, the idea was to model, the just jacked up levels of trust and communication and coordination between the Allies. The other way that they do that in the game, and again, this is not something you can do solo, but there's communication restrictions. So through the first 2 turns, the British and the French can talk about what they want to do in order to defend against the Germans. They can coordinate how they want to defend, or if they want to attack, you attack here, or you try and attack here, and I'll go over here, or I'll use my planes for this. Like, they can talk about all that stuff through the first 2 turns, and then after those first 2 turns, they can't communicate anymore about what the other wants to do, or any sort of unified strategy. And if they do, there will be penalties. So if the British player talks to the French player and says, "Yeah, I'm going to do this." "Oh, well, you're in the non-communication turns, so you're going to take a penalty," and they'll essentially rule out potential victories, or they're essentially handing victory conditions to the Germans if they talk after the first 2 turns about shared strategy. So that's another thing. Obviously, that's not a game element that I can actually do solo, but it is one of the factors that factors into the game if there's 2 people playing it. So interesting little rule mechanism there. I don't know, how that impacts the fact that I don't think the Allies can actually win. All that, it's already hard enough even without the communication rules. So I don't know what it adds in terms of difficulty, because it's already nearly impossible for the Allies to win. So it would be curious to see in an opposed game how that would actually play into the outcome of the game. I don't know that the outcome would be significantly different. So anyway, that's the first game in this series of 4 games, Betrayal. The others are there's Springtime for Hitler, which is a Michael Ranella design. There is the Seeds of Disaster, and this seems to be the most involved one of the 4 games. It's got the longest rules. It's got the most charts. It has a little deck of cards you can see there, and it has the only one that actually has some army displays on it. So it seems like it's got the most heft to it. And then the 4th game is Strange Victory. which is on actually the back of the Betrayal rules. So it's also a smaller one. So I'm not sure which one I'm going to try next. I may try the Seeds of Disaster just because it is the most involved looking one, and I'll be curious to see what that particularly models. I'm curious to see if any of these other 3 games get into the political aspect of the French Republic. I mean, it wasn't just militarily where the problems were for France. Politically, there were also problems as well. You had a right-wing faction of the French government and French people that were sympathetic to the Nazis and saw the Nazis as a better alternative than the socialists to their left in the country, and so were willing to give over the country to the fascists if it meant eliminating or crushing the left-wing socialist elements of French government and society. And so I'm curious if any of the other 3 games address that kind of stuff. So this one was purely military, intended to model the sort of cluster that was the Allied, the French and British and minor countries, military and diplomatic collaboration, tending to model how bad it is. And I think, that's the betrayal maybe in the title, is that the 2 countries were not able to work it out in order to defend against the Germans. So anyway, that's just a quick look at Betrayal. I'll take a look at some of the other games and probably post videos for those as well.